All right, cool. Happy Monday, folks. This is the July 22nd meeting of the OpenJS Security Collab space. I just dropped a link. Let me do it again in case it's not captured um, for one of the meeting agenda items today. So on the agenda, we have the formatting of the OpenJS security compliance guidelines. I spent some time working through a number of different scenarios on this, but unfortunately, I posted the links in the wrong task, which I only noticed this morning. So unfortunately, this will be a first scene for some of y'all. So we'll walk through it. Let me share my screen and we can get.
Hey, Brad, I think we lost your audio when you shared your screen.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
This has happened before, I think. This is good to know. Maybe I'll just reinstall Zoom or something. Cool. All right. So now that we're back, so just a friendly reminder for folks, the security compliance guidelines are organized in two different ways. And so there's two different index kind of lists. One is by category, and category is basically by type, and the other is by priority group. And the priority group being the more important one because that's kind of the list of the order that we're recommending that folks follow. So to start out, I have different sets of index options here. You'll see they're organized in 1.1 to 3.3 for kind of a different sort of style. So the first group is just a bulleted list with the top indents kind of organizing by category. So we see in priority group two, there are guidelines from two different categories, and so these are how they are organized. And I created just to kind of see how things would scroll. I didn't create all of them, but I did create a number of the priority groups just to see what they would look like as a group together. Group 1.2 puts some numbering around the items themselves. So there's a referenceable list to say, oh, we're working on item 8. Um, then if we go down to 1.3, I took a different approach in terms of numbering. And this is something we haven't really talked about before. And I realized when putting this together that it's probably something we should have talked about earlier, which is instead of having one long list of every single item, so in other words, 1 to 72, uh, the guidelines are numbered within their category. So in other words, uh, user authentication was category 1 in the spreadsheet. So these first four for user authentication are 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Then we go into option group two, which puts things in a table instead of a bulleted list, but without any IDs. You can see how kind of this scrolls. Um, and then adding IDs. And when I did it in tables, when I was playing around with this, I kind of started to prefer just organizing things using the category-based numbering scheme of like this. So here we have that. And then I took a chop at trying to put in the actual guidance and expectations around these items into the tables. So now they start getting a little compressed, and you have to kind of read the instructions to know what this means, which is like I is incubating, A is active, R is retiring. And I didn't bother putting the documentation around this in this yet, just because this is more of a visual test. Um, and I played around a little bit with putting the ID in different places, and especially if I don't, one of the reasons I did this one, which might you all might be like, why the heck did you put it this column here? Is in the event that folks thought that the 1 to 72 numbering scheme was better than the category based numbering scheme, I thought this might be a little bit, this location might be a little bit better for that. So, to kind of get started, I'd love to hear folks' initial thoughts, kind of just eyeballing these different groups to see what you find appealing and not appealing through this.
Can you scroll to the very, very top to see what the tee up intro is? Ah, does it need a little intro?
Yeah, I didn't bother putting like introduction documentation into this yet because this is just testing different ways of organizing the
Okay,
data.
copy that.
Chris.
Yeah, so thanks for putting this together. I think this really helps get a feel for what the different things, we talked about
Mhm.
are, what they look like here. So this is great. I have some comments. First of all, the later examples have more information. Like they have, like particularly, um, yeah, these have like the expected and the right, like there's some more information here. But if we're comparing these, like how would that information be conveyed in the earlier examples? Because those are just missing that information, correct?
That's correct. So the question really is in the main index where we show folks the whole list of all of the guidelines, how much information do we want to present to them in that initial index list? There's also the category indexes, which organize things by category, and also the if you once we click into the priority groups, there's this information is presented there in different ways as well. So I guess the question is like, do we need to show all of this information in the main index or not? And if we did, like, yeah, that's why there's different levels of information on these options. Is I wasn't sure what the right level of detail is, frankly.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I don't know if like it would make sense to have, for example, like an for like option one, like maybe there's an option 1.4 which includes this information to see like how would this example look like if we wanted to include that, because you're kind of like mixing the, do we
Mm.
include this information only in the table view but not in the list view. So would it
I
make
gave it
sense
a
to have a,
shot at doing it here, and it was in bulleted form. It was quite challenging, I would say, to put all that information into bullets in a way that
okay,
made sense, like visually. The bullets, as they are kind of clunky, um, but yeah, I didn't take a shot at that, but it just was so not pretty that I didn't like include it.
I see. Okay, so you did, so basically, yeah, you couldn't find a good way to convey that information in that format,
Mhm.
basically. I
Yeah.
understand. All right, I have some more thoughts. The numbers, when it comes to numbering things, generally like numbering like has some semantic meaning behind it. Like, for example, if there are steps or the order matters, or if there's sort of a priority. It's not clear that that applies here, at least where you've got the numbering of like within the list. Um, so I would tend to shy away from them. The other big thing is that cross references break when the information changes. Static numbers. So if you have somebody, oh, I did number 3, and then it changes, which we expect it to change, right? It's not going to be a static forever. And that's going to like introduce the risk of breaking those sorts of things there. So again, I would tend to shy away from the numbers. And the other thing is if you scroll up, I think in your list examples, um, sort of a nit, but not really. The first bullet point in your lists are not list items, they're headings. So I would like to see those be actually headings rather than the list, because otherwise there's no reason to have everything indented to the right like that. And the final thought that I had was on your further examples where everything is in tables. Tables are unwieldy to maintain in Markdown. They're great for displaying tabular data when we really want to display tabular data. But I notice here in we don't see the edit or the view, like I can't see the actual Markdown code for this, but
Here, let me fix that.
I mean, I at the same time I know what tables look like in Markdown, but
Yeah.
I think it helps to illustrate like this is the thing that we would be editing when we come to make changes to this. And
Yeah,
especially,
the tables were uniquely challenging too. So if we look at more of these complicated ones, these more
yeah,
detailed ones,
especially the more columns you have.
yeah,
So sometimes, even though the tables sometimes look better rendered, sometimes we sacrifice a little bit of the ideal display in favor of maintainability of the source content. Um,
yeah. I found this to not be so bad if we keep it simple. And so I appreciate the feedback one on the IDs. Um, I ran one of the things that I was challenged by was the maintainability of them over time and not breaking references. Like if we pull something out and we add something, it's a real challenge to keep those going. I wasn't sure about the value of having an ID to help communicate and to make sure we're talking about the same item over that maintainability, because it does, I would imagine from the user perspective, it would be quite helpful to say like, okay, we're working on 1.4 right now, rather than having to provide like use like a long descriptive name to describe it.
well, you can solve that by using UUIDs, and then if you change the ordering, you don't have the numbers don't change.
Um, so like a UUID, talking about like uh, a 2-character hex or something like that, maybe.
Well, or just a custom slug, like like a prior the first thing in priority group 3, you could call it like user dash auth dash SSH or something. I don't know. But like that's the reason that the
Oh,
best practices badge site also has like a slug for each requirement, is to avoid the inevitable churn from numbers changing.
that's actually a great suggestion, Gordon. I'll take a stab at that idea, um, and see how that goes. I like that idea. That seems much more viable than number, or what I suggest is a 2-character random hex ID. Um, cool. So with the slug idea in mind, then I totally hear where you're coming from on the maintainability of tables. That said, they present really nicely. Um, you don't have to keep raising your hand, Chris. Like we can have this be conversational.
Well, I don't interrupt, and if other people want to speak, I don't want to jump in line. So the other thing is like this, some of these things have information that I don't need to see, or I don't need to see on every row. I very much favor reducing the signal to noise ratio. In this view you have, if you just, I literally, if I'm going through this, I don't care about the first 5 columns. They just take up space for me, and they're not helping me do what I'm trying to do. I only care about what's in the last column. So why are you showing me the rest of this information? Um, it's good information to dig into and be able to access. Um, but I'm really only interested on what the actual substantive content is. Like I don't need to see, user account permissions times, the n rows for every guideline, right? That's a heading. So yeah, I very much favor like example one, or a variation of example one.
Up here.
Yeah, the very first one that you have, with the tweak of making the heading not the first bullet point and making it a heading.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm actually really receptive to that idea. And now with the also with Jordan's suggestion of using a slug, um, I think I'll take a stab at refining um, 1.2 into using a slug-like format, and I'll take a stab at 2.1 and using slugs and getting rid of the category instead. That sounds both of those sound like really good ideas.
Um, and the only other, so there is one piece of information that I think is useful, and that is because it doesn't directly translate to the priority groups, I'm pretty sure, which is like the whether it's expected, or what's the other term that's expected and recommended?
Deferred, expected, recommended. Yes.
Okay. So for those, I do think that is helpful to indicate with the items themselves. So I'd be looking for what's a clean way to do that that doesn't interrupt the flow, because I don't think it should affect the flow of the information. But maybe to the right of each item at the end, I don't know if it's an emoji or just the letter in bold or something, so that it's like not interrupting or distracting me while I'm looking at the list, but the information is there without me having to go and dig into another document.
Um, oh, you're talking about putting it in this one rather than the
Yeah,
more
just
detailed
that
group.
point. Like I don't need the miter, I don't need the common weakness
Mhm.
enumeration. That I think I should have to dig into, but knowing what is expected of me at my level for OpenJS Foundation, if I'm an impact project or what have you, that is something I'm going to be interested in at this level.
So that's pointing to more like this style of table then.
I think there's a way to have that one piece of information in line with the list without changing the format and without affecting the layout. Maybe it's an M dash and then the letter that signifies whether it's expected or suggested or
Could you
recommended.
give me? I'm struggling to visualize. Could you give
Yeah,
help me
on the
out?
left, yeah, if you scroll all the way up, because let's
Okay.
go back to the list example. At the end of any of the lines, just add a dash and put a letter.
Oh, I see.
That
Um,
I'm spitballing here. It's one idea of
hmm.
having the information there without having to jump to like tables or changing the layout of the bullet list, and things like that.
Yeah, I tried putting it, and I wish I kept them now. I tried putting it in the front. I tried putting it in a sub bullet, and it what I found was it became very visually busy to actually look at the list itself. Like it made the list really hard. Like I struggled to go like, wait a minute, which one is this? Because so many of the descriptions are long that it sort of like got lost in the noise a little bit. I'll mock something up to take another stab at it, but um, I thought it was so challenging to read, I didn't bother keeping it when I made a shot at it. But I'll go back and try that one again. Um, I think the one of the things I was thinking about to resolve this, um, how to store this information, was to have a list for each group. Like here's a list for incubate, here's a list for active, here's a list for retiring. But I was really cognizant of the concern I heard about maintainability. And so the more documents and more versions of this we have, the more we have to make sure that like, okay, like have a run book where like, okay, hold on tight. If you want to make a change, don't forget to change it in these 15 different places all at once. But frankly, after this conversation, it seems to me it'd probably be a good idea and worth the effort to create lists for each group. And then that would probably resolve a lot of data display issues, even though it'd be a little bit more challenging to maintain. So I can take a stab at that as well, so we can kind of see what that would look like. I was also thinking about that anyway in the context of the checklist, the project level checklist, so that they can have like an MD file that they can post within their project so that they can keep track of and display how they're doing. So for them, having that list anyway would mean that like, well, I guess we're already here and we're creating that. So it's not a big deal to structure things that way. And then that resolves all of the data display issues for usability for the user groups, because then they would just be focusing on their one, and then we can have, um, and then like the use case for the index that shows everything is more of an informational view rather than one that's meant to be interacted with and actioned so much. Um, while I have folks here still, I want to go over the detail pages really quick. I played around with a bunch of different versions and different ways of showing this information. So this would be the information you'll see. One of the nice things that I liked about the IDs, but a slug works out even better, is to have some sort of heading, like referenceable thing that also provided a place to put a link. But with the slug idea, which I think we're going with, that resolves that. I played around with different types of tables, and uh, to be honest, my favorite one wound up being 3.2, and the reason for that was um, I want like there's in none of the other options is the different um, criteria groups actually spelled out in words in case people don't look at the documentation, because we should assume that. So this one wound up being this option wound up being my favorite. Puts a slug on the top, something that provides links that we can like provide like a link to. It shows the information around the category. It actually spells out what these things are meant to be in case people don't look at the docs. And then the bullet points here for these sections, and I'm happy to make these headers instead of bullet points too. To your point before, Chris, I think that was a good call out. This is pretty easily maintained and also very easy to view. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your all's thoughts are, but this one right here seemed to be, I think, um, the winner. But yeah, what do you all think on this?
Yeah, I think I very much it's hard to some of these are like I'm trying to notice the difference, like spot the difference. And I'm trying to
I
see
did
like,
think about I did think about writing down like, okay, this has
hmm,
this thing, this has this thing, this has this thing, but like that pretty much doubled the effort for documentation, to be honest.
yeah. I I don't know. I think the example at the end looks good. Again, I think we just get rid of the tables, and I think we can do just fine. Um, although it's also not terribly unwieldy to have these tables here because it's a single row. But
Yeah, it's not bad.
if you have a single row, maybe you don't need a table. But
Mhm.
I think honestly, any of these variations are probably fine. Um,
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna.
oh, go ahead.
actually, let me take a step back. I think we're actually missing information here. And that might inform the design choice here, because won't there be a longer, like a paragraph of text explaining a little bit, or are you just expecting you
Um,
could only ever have the single guideline title?
that's a good point. There wasn't really an idea of having an explanation for each of these.
Okay.
Um,
I think
the
there,
the
I think, sorry, I think over time, at least, there probably would be,
mhm.
or for some of, maybe not for every single item. Um, but I think there's, we should allow for, and we should know where that's going to live in here and what that's going to look like.
It's a good call out. That's a good call out. Yeah, for Rev 1, I was leaning on sources and docs and references for that. Um, I was thinking about whether or not it made sense to basically pull a quote out of one of the references to provide that rather than doing original writing. Say, basically reference, like, say, here's what the CWE says on this topic, and provide that paragraph in here. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would not want to duplicate the content. And,
Mhm.
let's point to the, especially where there's authoritative sources. But I can imagine a world where there's some information there. Maybe there's something specific to OpenJS Foundation projects. Maybe there's some crossover with a requirement of governance or from the charter, something like that. Like, there may be one or more. I'm not saying everything needs its own like blurb. But it's something more along those lines rather than like restating something from CWE.
Yeah.
And the other comment I would make is like on these pages, like your earlier examples where there's like just letters and stuff, we're not under such constraints with the details. So I think like the examples further down where you can write out the whole word is perfectly fine for these pages.
Cool. Um, so action item I will take. Like, what do you think about this approach of having the two different tables here like this for that? So I think what I would wind up doing if like we use 3.2 based upon what you just mentioned is I would probably put the paragraph between this table and the references section. And I think now what I would probably do is actually create a reference header and then put everything below that so it's organized into like discrete sections. Um, how does that grab you?
I think the table incubating active retired table perhaps makes sense. I think the category and guideline thing makes less sense. The guideline is actually like the title of the page, right? We're on the page for this guideline. Is that correct?
Mm.
Yeah.
The guideline, the page is per priority group. So,
Oh, okay. Then the guideline should be a heading, like it should be a subheading. Then that's what I
okay,
would expect.
I'll take a stab at that then. That's actually a really good call out. Um, and so I'll play around with these then a little bit more. These aren't bad to play around with, so I can take that action item this evening, and I'll update the correct issue this time so you all see it. Um,
And sorry,
and
you
I'll
said
also
the
take it. Go ahead.
sorry, you said the page was for the priority group or the category?
Um, the priority group. I think that the category indexes, the way that they wound up being organized is, I'm not sure. Like, I think what might wind up happening is we wind up having pages for priority groups and pages for categories. Um, that's kind of the way my guess is it'll wind up working out right now. So that way you can see all like, but I'm not, we can, if we go, we haven't really talked about the category index as much, but maybe that's not actually necessary given that if we have like the categories organized like something like this is enough information where we actually don't need to create distinct category pages. Silence. Thoughts?
I'm not sure if Chris is thinking of a response or giving space for other. Okay, cool. Just checking. So my feeling here is like, or at least I was thinking like how much further do we want to go on iterations on this before we put it in GitHub and get like real world feedback? I kind of feel like we're probably there. Um, but I don't want to if folks feel that we're not, that's totally fine. But I'm starting to get that feeling that like it would be better to get our best foot forward out and then see if there's comments from people who are trying to implement it and use that as a basis for further refinement. Um, I'm only thinking that like, there's a lot of value in getting this out, and I'd like to start seeing that value as soon as we can. So curious what other people think.
I think a lot of the feedback today was really good to take another stab to just show folks like here's what we heard and here's what that looks like. And hopefully we can do that asynchronously early this week. And if that's the case, then get it to good enough. The ways to make it maintainable in case we have to change stuff, like frankly, this is not as painful to create as maybe we thought, like especially for even if we wind up redoing a lot of it, it's not that bad. So I think the next step here is to take in the feedback and produce a couple more options just so people could see it and then follow up on those specific options. And if, unless there's something dramatically different, or we go like, oh man, that was actually a terrible idea, or something like that comes up, which I doubt will happen, then we can just go with those and land it. So yeah, I don't think we need to do another whole cycle waiting for next week. I don't think. I think we can just have this finished by and like landed on GitHub by Monday because it's actually not like as much of a nightmare as I initially thought putting this all into the GitHub manual. Again, like it was a lot of you can see a lot of iteration and playing around, and I think a lot of the experience for me was also seeing how the information would what it took to get this information in these formats. I'm less gun shy on tables than others because I think some of these views are actually seeing like the reason I created like multiple of these is to show like what the scroll would look like as a whole thing. Um, so it sounds like to me that um, there's still a question on tables versus bullets for these, and I'm going to work on um, creating a version of this table where instead of a category, we have a slug. I'm going to work on creating a version of so that's option 3.1.3. Excuse me, 2.1. I'm going to work on a version of those that uses a slug instead. I'm also going to work on a version of the index using bullets and headers instead, using a slug as well to see how that looks and works out. And so then we can choose. Basically, the choice will come down to like a really fundamental one, like do we use the bulleted list or do we use a table? And then for these, I will take a stab at cleaning these up and detableifying this a bit more and see how that grabs folks. And I think the category indexes, frankly, I think this is probably the best approach for the category indexes um, so that people can see what's going on in one whole view. Chris, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, it'd be nice to get some other opinions, because I feel like I was sort of negative on the tables, in favor of the lists. But I'm just one person. And in terms of the maintainability of tables, uh, deteriorates in a directly proportionally to the number of columns that you have and the amount of data that changes in those columns. But in this case, like for example, even in the page that you're on with, I think is the most columns, you have only you have kind of the IDs might get replaced with slugs, right? But
Yeah.
you have some of your columns with very little content. So changing like column 2 isn't going to shift the entire structure of the table when we're editing it. And so it's really the guideline that becomes, so it's not even in table format, this isn't terribly unwieldy. So what I'm saying is if folks like the tables, I'm not dying on any hills here about pushing back against the tables. If we were dealing with more of a maintainability issue, then it might be more of a concern for me, but it's not, to that level. And the other thing I wanted to mention, like it's sort of unrelated, but not really. And we may have talked about this like weeks and weeks ago, but with regard to the categories of incubating, active, and retired, the active category combines both at-large and impact projects. And I was just wondering, like, is that just for simplification, or do we really not want to have things that are required? Like, because usually, like, there's greater expectations of the impact projects, there's a higher standard, but there's no distinction here with the active projects with regard to at-large and impact.
Ben, I'll defer to you on that one. I'd like to get your thought on that idea. I'm very receptive to it.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Sorry, it's a dramatic
Cool.
pause. I was actually noodling with something else. So just before we wrap up, I want to just talk about like rollout with CPC and how we want to think about that. So I'm just putting that as a teaser so I don't forget.
So yeah, we can put. I know there were some changes to renaming, like there was the I can't say the word right now. Amer Ametrius and Emeritus projects have
It's
used
just archive now. It's all
Is this
archive.
archive?
Yes,
Okay, so I can
we've
change
made all
that.
those changes. We can all pronounce it now.
Okay, cool. So I'll change it from retired to archive, which makes it an A.
I should hit on
Uh,
Chris is asking for, I don't think we answered the question.
yeah, so we need to have an at-large column, an impact column, and change retired to archive. So that would give us 4 columns instead, and we need to decide what's in what for each of those. So we need another cycle of reviewing that. But
Oh, so we do want to have a different.
mhm, that's what
Okay.
I heard from Ben.
Well,
Let's do this. If we haven't, my question was more like, did we take this decision, or was this kind of like
yeah.
and it sounds like no. It sounds like we did not go. We want, make a decision on. We want the exact same stuff, and it was just sort of this is required for active. So I don't want to slow this down anymore and
Mhm,
give us like another full cycle of work to do on figuring out what is necessary for impact. And I think that's a fine exercise. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want to block on that. So maybe
mhm.
we just take this as like a follow-on or parallel path item and go, okay, for some of these, does it make sense to, and maybe it's some of the things that are not expected for active, but are like more aspirational. Maybe those are the things that we want to say are expected for impact projects or something like that. I don't know, but I
Yeah, I
just,
think that's fine. Like it would be
Yeah.
great if it was we didn't it would be great if we didn't need that, if it was simpler, if it was just like these are the requirements for all our projects. But I don't know if that's practical, right? Given them, and I'm not familiar enough with them to say one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If we can simplify it, that's better and give folks less stuff to have to worry about. And then the other thing is like, well, at-large projects probably want to at some point be an impact project, and so like to not defer that and do what they need to do.
Yeah.
So if the exercise, it's just it's not to say let's do this. It's more like let's take a look at these items, and for these, do any of them make sense where we would have a substantially enough difference between what we would say for impact versus at large? And if the answer is no, then no, absolutely not. Let's not have an extra column and extra stuff to have to worry about. And again, that introduces there's an additional maintenance cost that comes with that as well. And so maybe it doesn't make sense to do it. And that would
Chris,
be
what
great.
I heard from the idea was that as we see this actually get used between different types of projects, I think we'll find out whether we'll find ourselves in a situation where something that maybe we put as expected, we find in a lot of cases should be deferred. And I suspect maybe organizing those differences between impact and at large projects will be a way to handle those situations when they come up as we see projects implementing it.
Yeah.
So I think this is something where we'll learn along the way whether or not it makes sense to do that, and we can adjust as we learn.
Yeah, so I wonder, and again, this should not slow down anything or block anything, but like the term active maybe needs rejiggering, because like incubating projects are not inactive. They are very much active, right?
Yeah. Is there a word we can use for that? That's appropriate. Like,
I mean, you could maybe even just change the A to be an A/I, and it means at large/impact, and call it a day. I don't know. Although
I will play around with it. I will play around with it a little bit and see what we come up with. Is there an idea of a member project versus incubating projects are not members? No? Okay. Given Ben's look like no. Okay. All right. Well, we don't have to wordsmith this too hard. I think we can keep it simple for right now. And so I think I have what I need to play around this evening for next steps so we can get one last look to see if there's any little tweaks that should happen. And then I can go forth and be awesome and just wrap up the work and actually put this on GitHub. So the things to do are the priority group list, the category indexes. Unless you all like really disagree with this, I'm going to use this one um, uh, just to so that there's enough information on it, and so you can see them all together. And I'm going to take a stab at putting this information in header and playing around with this format a little bit to see what looks best. And you guys will be able to check this out like sometime Tuesday-ish. And then once we get the thumbs up, like, cool, good enough, um, I'll just go and create everything, and then we'll be done and good to go. So the big deliverable is like there's going to be a list of, there will be a distinct index and checklist for each type of project, incubating, um, at large impact, and archived projects, so that they each have their own MD file that they can use as a checklist to check off, like I've done this or not have done this. That will be their main document that they'll be using and living off of versus these reference things. So I'll also create that as well. And I think there will inevitably be some tweaks, but hopefully we can work on those asynchronously this week as I land drafts of those, and then hopefully we're all patting ourselves on the back on Monday in the next meeting on how this looks. So cool. Okay. Um, document design via Markdown is I'll put on my resume now, from now on. And yeah, any other thoughts, folks? I really do appreciate the inputs on this because there is no one right way. Like you can see how many different iterations I played around with to form my own opinion on this.
Yes, and then you could see me backtracking in real time my opposition to the tables. Which but when I sort of nudged folks to get some feedback on opinions on that, and nobody, and I got no bites from the fish in the room. So I'm gonna start calling people out. Ulysses, Jordan, Ben, thoughts on tables versus lists uh for the display. Do
Sure.
you like the top of the document more or the bottom of the document more?
I do like tables. Um, but I think in Markdown, you are absolutely correct. Once you have more than a few columns, it really becomes very difficult to just author. But I think as a reader, it's easier for me to process. Personally, like personal opinion.
There will
I
have
think
to
I
be a run
concur.
book just to keep track. Yeah, I agree with that idea as well.
Yeah, as
And
a reader, it's easier for me to process. As a writer, I absolutely despise Markdown tables.
Yeah, that was my concern too. I think Jordan agreed. I think I heard a concur from Jordan on your comment, Ben. But the thing that might make this palatable enough for me, and I kind of spoke about it earlier, but I'll reiterate. Scroll down, please, Rudd, to the one that has like even more columns. Yeah, so like even where you have this many, like because most of the time if we're making changes, we're going to be like copy paste an entire cut or
mhm.
paste an entire line or change like just the one column, um, or maybe change a letter here or there. Like the maintainability being a nightmare doesn't strike me as such a big deal for this in this situation. Um, I don't know. That's my high level thought. So I feel like if everybody's in agreement that we like the table view, we prefer this to looking at the list, then I would not want to be the stick in the mud that says let's not use tables because of maintainability. So I don't know. Maybe we'll just leave it at that and have Rudd make the executive decision there on his own. It sounds like nobody's going to be particularly heartbroken one way or the other, if I'm not mistaken.
It wasn't. Once I got my groove going on these, playing, I thought I honestly I thought I was looking into the void on creating these tables when I first started, but it turned out to really actually not be that bad the once I had the initial row, like that first row set up, and after that it was just copy pasting and me giving myself carpal tunnel on my Bluetooth Apple keyboard, going through different sections and stuff like that without a mouse. But from a maintainability standpoint, the only real concern I have is the tighten at the how well adhered to the run book is on. Okay, when you do want to change, like if you want to change something, don't forget to change in all these places. If you want to go update something, add something, don't forget to change all these places. If you want to remove something, don't forget to update all these places. And keeping that list really tight and good, that's actually my biggest concern. And so yeah, the once I have all this done, as I'm doing this myself, I'll be creating the run book just so that I can make sure that I don't mess this up when I go out and create everything. So that's how that run book will form, and we'll just have to really make sure we stick to it. So yeah.
Uh, so for rolling this out, like I was thinking there would be um, some time in an upcoming CPC call to kind of run through this. Um, does that seem like the right approach? Is there a different way that we want to think about that?
I think it's a great question. So on the one aspect, I remember Robin saying like the we are delegated the authority for the actual content, right? But your question is more about how do we socialize this? How do we get
Yeah.
folks on board? Um, I think that something that the CPC should decide is in regard to the rollout is like, okay, if we're making these expected, like that means they're actually expected, right? And that means that probably like the project progression, like to become an impact project, these probably need to be checked or something. And you know, part of that is maybe allowing some space for there being an exception process where if like one of these is not met, so we're not like necessarily blocking projects on things. But yeah, I think the CPC can come up with like a hey, we have these new security things and projects are expected to be this, and let's give you like X amount of time to report back to us. You know, we don't want to say like, oh, you need to do this right now, drop everything, right? um I don't know, those are my high level thoughts when I start thinking about it. Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that's why I suggested, I think in a previous meeting that in order to know, to really measure what should be expected, we also need to get an audit of existing projects. Like, what do people already do? And then look at the delta and then estimate or ask about the likelihood of them being willing to close the gap. Because if if let's say all the impact projects are willing to do it and a few of the non-impact projects are willing to get all the way up there as well, then that's a pretty good indicator that it's a good set of standards. And then obviously an exception process would always want to be, we always need to want to leave the door open for that. But the goal should probably be approaching 100% compliance with the expected. But like, we can't do that unless we measure it both
Yeah.
now and over time.
So then it sounds like, yeah, and again, I think let's talk about it at the CPC call. It sounds like what we want to do at first is get some projects that would be happy to take a look, and at the very least provide us with like which ones they've done. Um, that alone is helpful. And then beyond that, if they can also work on implementing the ones that they don't, and they can tell us like how much effort they went through, and or if there was like, okay, for this one we can't do it or we don't want to do it and here's why. It'd be great to get some projects to volunteer to do that, you know, such as like NVM, maybe, I don't know, just, you know, off the top of my head.
Yeah, Jordan and I are due to catch up on some SBOM stuff anyway. So like Jordan, you and I should chat on, and maybe we can like you and I for a single maintainer project talk about how we could approach this and ideate that
Sure.
without taking up this whole meeting. And
Sounds
I
good.
also have the action to follow up with Wes and kind of get his take on this to and put it in front of the Express TC. I was also
Mhm.
planning on reaching out um, I forget his name now, to John over at Lodash to see what his thoughts were.
um yeah, definitely rope Wes in. I'll note that you have two people from the Express TC in this call right now.
Right.
So two people on the security working group of Express as well. So yeah, we're also happy to help in those discussions. For the CPC though, for like the broader issue, and to Ben's question, are we at the point right now, like, should we add an item to discuss at the CPC like ASAP, or Rudd, do you want to go through kind of what you were just talking about first, or?
The CPC here, let me stop sharing. We're kind of done with that. Let me look at my
I guess
calendar really
there's probably a
quick.
meeting tomorrow for CPC where we could
Yeah,
talk
maybe
about
we could
items.
do the CPC meeting next week. That way we can show them like a complete, like that way all the things will actually be done and it's less of a hypothetical.
Next week is a working session where the CPC will work on like specific items. So if possible, well, we could do a couple things. Like one, we could work to get that working session to be focused on this, if that was appropriate. The other is to try and do something tomorrow, I don't know how much the CPC knows about this or the status of this, other than the folks that attend this meeting. So, but yeah, I think those are your options. Either try and hit tomorrow, or we can work to have this as the topic of a working session.
What if
Chris?
we do this? What if we and Rudd, I'm not trying to sign you up to come to the meeting tomorrow. We can bring this up in
I
your
can
slot.
totally make the meeting
Um,
tomorrow. That works.
what we can do is we can keep it brief. We can just mention what the activity is, mention these things, and see if there are anybody that represent any projects that are there that would be up for taking a look at the list, going through the exercise, right? Taking a look at the list. And to me, it's two parts. And if they only want to sign up for one part, that's fine. The second part is doing stuff. The first part is just saying, look at these items. Which one of these do you check off? That would be helpful for us to know for a project at any stage. And the other part is if you're also up for it, after that, implement the things that are missing and tell us kind of like how long that took you, if there were challenges, and just see if there's anybody that bites. And we can sort of leave it at that. And then the next in the next meeting, whether it's next week or the following week or later, then we can do the broader presentation of here's all the content and I don't know some of the other and the broader questions around like when what does it look like in terms of requiring this for project progression? What does this look like for asking existing projects to get this done on a timeline and things like that? Maybe that's something we can defer to later, right?
Yeah,
That sounds
that's a very good strategy, I think.
Okay, so just closing out, to get this on the agenda for tomorrow, we just need a GitHub issue, right?
Yeah, we can also just bring it up. I don't know. Definitely the GitHub issue is the and tagging it with CPC agenda will for sure get it on there. Although at this point, because like there's an automatic issue gets generated, and if that's already happened, then it won't make it onto the
I think
agenda.
it has already happened. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's going to happen
should,
soon, probably.
And
Yeah, we
we'll
should
add it to the issue. So there's
Yeah.
already an issue for the meeting. Let's add it to the
Yeah, as a comment or something.
we'll
Yeah.
add it manually. We don't need to create an issue right now. Okay, 723. No, I can just edit the
It's ticket, yeah.
I can edit it directly. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it sounds good. I'm pretty comfortable with this plan. So that sounds good. I feel pretty good about the edits and work to do for this week just to get it all done. And I'll make sure to put the updates and pin you all in the right issue so you can see it this time.
Okay, so I'll put my name against this. Is anybody for sure going to be there tomorrow? Ben?
I'll definitely be there. Yeah.
I can be there.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute. There's like some type of chainsaw happening.
All right, I'm just putting our names in parentheses there so that when people look at it and go, what the heck is this item that doesn't have an issue associated, then they'll ask us what's going on. We can update them.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rich, for all the
folks.
work on this. Like, I know Markdown can be tedious, so your efforts are
It
greatly
was not as
appreciated.
bad. It was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. It really isn't. It was an interesting exercise. It really was just a carpal tunnel session. That's all.
Right.
And
Good to do with
I
a
mean,
cup of coffee.
don't necessarily suffer alone. Like, I don't want to be duplicating like your efforts or anything like that. But once you've kind of got stuff laid out and you can go, hey, can somebody, we just need some copy pasta in this format over here. Does anybody want to throw, have 20 minutes here or there?
Yeah.
We could
I'd be happy to do a
maybe
chunk of
save your
that,
wrists a
like-
little bit.
Yeah.
I think honestly the biggest group of work now is to create the slug. Like that's going to take like executive thinking, and once that's done, then I might enlist you all, or I might just do it just to make sure it all like is nice and like it makes sense, just to put it all together, because I'm still assuming there will be tweaks along the way to creating that final work product, which is why only reason I don't actively ask to enlist folks, frankly, because there's always room for little tiny things along the way. So I will definitely keep that in mind though, and I will enlist if I feel like that's the right approach. But I don't think it's like that bad to go and do a lot of this stuff manually anyway. just to make sure it all is nice and organized. And again, I want to use me going through this and creating these things iteratively. The way I'm thinking about doing it is in like okay, let me create a run book and make sure that run book actually like makes sense and is like really comprehensive and like really sets us up for success for edits in the future.
Yeah, you're testing it basically. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
The only thing I would say, Rhett, is yeah, yes, I agree with most of what you're saying, and like I feel like I would probably do something similar if I was in that boat. But I would also say that like the more that we can involve other folks in some of the collaboration effort, the easier it will be in the future for them to work on this and the more comfortable
It's
they'll
true.
be, right? So just try and balance that a little bit.
Okay, cool. I will keep that in mind as well. I will find delegatable tasks
Yeah.
in this. All right, folks. Happy Monday. Thank you for all your time and the thoughts. And have a great week.